Well, today we welcome you to the final CERIAS seminar of the spring 2019 semester. Tonight we're honored to have with us a team from right here at Purdue, and I will turn it over to Eric Go, who is with the Rosen Center for Academic Computing here at Purdue and has been responsible for several projects that develop systems to support academic research, and we'll get a chance to look at one of those today. So, Eric?
Thank you. I'm here with this undergraduate student team, and we're going to tell you about the Purdue Live Security Analyzer, PULSAR. I'm going to give a basic overview, and then the students will go through and provide you details about the implementation and the impact that it provides on Purdue's network. So the real goal of this particular project is to enhance the cybersecurity on Purdue's research network. So we identified that there was a gap in the cybersecurity framework for research, and that gap was there was no network-based monitoring or intrusion detection. And so the goal of that of this project is to implement network monitoring and intrusion detection on the campus research network. So we have some project goals and motivation to do this. What we would like to do is empower Purdue's faculty to be able to conduct research that has heightened cybersecurity requirements. So think of us aligning the research network cybersecurity framework with the cybersecurity framework that is in industry, maybe at an aerospace company or a defense company. The second goal is to aid cybersecurity researchers, which you guys, it might be you guys that are in this room, by using this system to produce network data and then anonymize that data and provide it back to you. The last goal is to engage undergraduate students and mentor them in the deployment and design of this advanced cyber infrastructure. So this is a NSF supported project under the Cybersecurity Innovation for Cyber Infrastructure program, and it's a collaboration between CERIAS, computer science, computer information technology, research computing, and IT security and policy. So a broad team has been assembled to solve this problem. So here are some of the people that are involved: project leadership at the PI and co-PI level. We also have the student team, which is very diverse. We have a lot of people who have worked on this over about the past year and a half to 2 years. And the student team includes people from, or undergraduate students from Purdue and from Ivy Tech, and also 2 high school students who did summer work for us last year and are now enrolled as freshmen in the upcoming class of Purdue. We also have mentors and staff from RCAC and ITSP. And the important part of this project is that the design and implementation was led by the student team, and they got help from the mentors. So I was a mentor and worked with them to help in this advanced deployment of a network monitoring system. So the student team is going to give you an overview of what we did. This is Shivam Trivedi. He is a graduating senior in CIT. Lauren Featherstone, also a graduating senior in CIT. And Brian Wirtz, who is graduating from Ivy Tech this year. So take it away, guys.
So hello, I'm Shivam, and I was responsible for the student engineering and systems administration side of the project as we built the system. And I worked on this project for the entire duration of the project. So just to give you some overview about how large Purdue's research infrastructure is, we have over 200 Purdue research groups that use the research computing resources. These include all of our community clusters, which provide compute to researchers. We have several world-class supercomputing clusters, thousands of nodes, and we've had multiple top 500 supercomputers in our infrastructure over the last few years. We have multiple petabyte scale data storage resources, some for like immediate result storage and like high performance storage, and some for like cold storage where you're trying to store like petabytes of data for a long period of time. Purdue ranks among the top US universities in terms of research computing cyber infrastructure. And this, most of it comes from our research infrastructure. We transfer hundreds of terabytes of data, both to and from the peer institutions daily. And this entire process is done over our dedicated high-speed network, which follows a science DMZ model. So a science DMZ model is very unique because it provides certain characteristics to allow research to be performed at a very high speed. So the science DMZ model, as you can see right here, is the green line right here. So what the science DMZ model does is that it bypasses all of campus infrastructure, and this is done at a very low latency, on a very low latency link and a very high throughput link. So this basically effectively provides a friction-free network for high speeds and minimal packet loss. It's optimized for high performance scientific applications than what a commodity network would look like. Another important characteristic of science DMZ is that the security policies are tailored to not impact the high-performance science environment. So in this scenario, it is important that there's consistent high throughput that is maintained to transfer large amounts of data, as well as a low latency is maintained, because no additional latency can be added to the network. So this model allows us to not be affected by a commodity network, which is like Purdue's Wi-Fi or student computers or anything of that sort. So speaking of Purdue's network, this is a very nice overview of what Purdue's research infrastructure looks like. As you can see right here, there's the wide area network, the campus core, and the research core. So these are like the three layers in our networking environment. And the campus core as you can see, is connected to data center and campus. So that's basically where the commodity network lies. And we are like down here, which are connected directly to the research core. So as you can see, the science DMZ and the commodity networks are slightly separated. And the commodity network usually passes through an inline IPS. And on the other hand, the research network is just uses mostly the 100 gig fiber optic links. So as you can see some of the arrows here, so let's say a traditional packet. For example, you're sitting on a laptop in one of the academic buildings, and you're using PAL, a wireless system, and you try to access something on the internet. So you can see these dark blue arrows right here. That's the path it would take. So it would go from the campus network to the campus core, then it would go up to the internet edge, and then it'll go through the link with the IPS on it to the internet. So this IPS provides some inline security for the for the computer that is on a commodity network. On the other hand, the traffic from research goes a different way depending on the type of traffic, especially if it's to another peer institution. So on the bottom right, you can see this cluster called CMS. CMS is one of our supercomputing clusters which consistently generates a lot of network traffic. And we are a tier 2 CERN supercomputing facility. So what happens is that CMS transfers a lot of data to and from the CERN facility in Geneva. So this is CMS is like a huge generator of network traffic for us. So a typical traffic from CMS would go to a research core. It would go up to the campus core. And as you can see, it's bypassing all the campus infrastructure, like the commodity infrastructure, goes to the internet edge. And because CERN would technically be classified as an internet 2 or a peer institution where they are part of the research institutions, they would bypass the IPS to go out to the Indiana Gigapop. So as you can see, very high throughput links all the way through, and we try to introduce as little latency as possible as it goes out to the internet. So because of such a large scale of the problem, there are a lot of challenges that we had to think about before we even started designing the system. So our research infrastructure served many types of research and science. Like it could be industry partners using our supercomputing clusters for some of their research, or just some academic research and collaboration between different departments. All of this provides, all of these researchers generate a huge volume of traffic. And it's very steady, and it's in both directions, in and out of the network. So usually we only think about the download speeds, but their upload is just as important as download for us, because we're uploading a lot of data to other institutes as well when we're transferring data out of here. So we definitely sustain 10 to 30 gigs of data at any given point, usually in the 10 to 20 Gbps range. And we frequently get bursts of 60 plus Gbps. And this is why typical inline IDS solutions or IPS solutions are not feasible, because A, they cannot handle that large amount of traffic, especially when there's a burst of traffic through the links, and B, it introduces significant amount of latency as the traffic gets analyzed. Yes?
Yeah, one thing about this, I would expect that kind of these scientific workloads, a lot of this may be loading in large data sets where, adding even 100 milliseconds of latency is probably not a big deal as long as you can handle the throughput. Whereas others could be some sort of distributed computing where they're actually using this cluster and some other cluster elsewhere. Do you have any idea what the types of traffic and whether it's actually just large volumes of data being sent one way, or whether it's actually really interactive where the latency would matter?
That is something that we will go over as the presentation goes along. The later stage, we'll talk about the types of traffic we see. But when we get to the Q&A session, we will have one of our full-time engineers actually talk about the traffic that they see on a daily basis. But we definitely do see traffic both ways. And given the science DMZ model, we tend to introduce as little latency as possible. Again, it's very important to some of the researchers where the traffic remains low latency.
I might just say something now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Press the button.
Like this?
Yeah, just
Okay.
press and release, the light should come on.
Okay. So we do see a couple different kinds of traffic. So one thing is a bulk data transfer that either comes in or goes out of the network. But we also see a lot of cases where we have data that is accessible via like a global federation of storage. So we'll see jobs at MIT, Caltech, wherever, actually running there and reading from our storage. So in those cases, increasing the latency by a bit could have a pretty severe impact. And with the amount of data that we receive, and with the expectation of how fast it should show up, a lot of times adding additional latency, even like in the hundreds of milliseconds, can cause a pretty serious problem. Because if somebody from CERN says, okay, we need to transfer this 20 terabyte data set to your site because we need to analyze it, if it's not there within a day or so, it's actually a problem. So we want to make sure to keep the links as wide open as possible.
Okay.
So yeah, as I was talking about, like we transfer a lot of data. So just here in the graph, you can see that over the last 3 months, we have transferred about 27 petabytes of data, both in and out of the network. As you can see, these shaded areas right here, those are the bursts of traffic when CMS decides it wants to transfer terabytes of data to some resource not on our infrastructure. So you can see, like, again, there's a huge burst as well. So it is very important for our infrastructure to be able to handle huge bursts of traffic when we are monitoring such bulk loads. Yeah, so as you can see in the bottom, the statistics, it also says that the max outbound speed was 80 gigs a second, and max inbound speed was about 71 gigs per second. So again, very high throughputs. And traditional IDS IPS solutions cannot handle that amount of traffic without causing significant issues. In fact, sometimes routers cannot handle that amount of traffic without causing significant issues. So because of these complex challenges and complex constraints, we have created an entire system consisting of multiple modules to create a solution, like a complete solution made up of different modules and different pieces. So as you can see, this is a high-level overview of what our architecture looks like for PULSAR. So going left to right, top to bottom, we have the network taps layer. The network tap layer is the layer which duplicates the traffic which is going in and out of our network and sends it to us. So we get the data that we are supposed to be monitoring. There's the traffic distribution layer, which will distribute all of the traffic into chunks of TCP and UDP flows or any other flows that you can think of to our analysis cluster. So it's like load balance. There's the traffic analysis layer. So it is a cluster of Zeek IDS server. So just to let you guys know, Zeek is formerly known as Bro. So Zeek is a network security monitor. So if you are familiar with Bro, Zeek and Bro are the same thing. It's just Zeek was renamed from Bro. So a cluster of Zeek IDS servers, they analyze all of the traffic that is sent to them. From the traffic analysis, there are two things that happen. Number one, we log every single traffic that we see. Obviously, so all of this logs are stored, and we do multiple different things with the logs, like storing it in cold storage for a long time in text format, as well as like sending it to a visualization cluster. There's the alerting layer, where once we flag malicious or weird traffic, and depending on how we have configured or fine-tuned our system, the system will alert us when it sees something that is of interest to the team. And the last layer is the blocking layer. The blocking layer is something that is currently under development. So the eventual goal is to automate the entire system so that the system can automatically block malicious traffic. This is slightly challenging and slightly important to tread carefully with, because there is a lot of constraints when it comes to like the stakes are very high when it comes to false positives and false negatives, especially false positives. For example, you see some malicious traffic and then you decide to block half of internet for Purdue's research infrastructure, because that can happen. You know these kind of things can happen. So that is something that we are treading lightly with, but that is currently under development and strategies are being developed for that. So as I was talking about the network taps right here on the top left, these are what our network taps look like. So there are the two campus core routers and the two research core routers, as you can see right here and here. We have tapped every single link going between these four routers. So this is where the PULSAR system resides, because like in a logical diagram. These taps are fiber optic taps. So they are fiber lines and they are optical taps. So they're pretty cool, because what they do is they actually split the light in the optic cables. So a part of the light goes ahead as intended, and the second portion of the light comes to us. And as you can see, there are two dotted lines coming out of each tap, is because there is basically a link for both inbound and outbound from each tap as we are duplicating all of the traffic. So as you can see, this tap is like pretty much inline and introduces like next to no latency, because this is literally us splitting the light while we're trying to get the data. So all of this traffic goes to the Arista layer. The Arista layer is our traffic distribution layer. The two Arista switches, they work together. They are configured to work together. They look at all of this traffic, and then they take then they distribute traffic to each of the server based on flows, so TCP flow, UDP flow. So the idea is that each flow would typically like just go to a single machine, so even if it sees the flow from somewhere else coming in. So we try to distribute it by flow everywhere. And at the bottom, as you can see, from the Aristas, the traffic is getting distributed to a Zeek cluster. There are about 10 servers in there, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. So when we're talking about that cluster down there, the cluster runs the core of the system, which is called Zeek. As I mentioned earlier, it's a highly parallel network security monitor. Zeek is very popular. It's used widely in industry and in government. And as it is gaining popularity, this was the best choice for us to use. Zeek is made up of 4 major components. There are the workers, which are the main process, so to speak. They are the process that analyze and log traffic. Each process is single-threaded, but multiple instances of the process can run per server. So for example, if you have a 24-core server, you can run 22 instances of Zeek on it and pin each of them to a CPU and leave 2 cores for something else, whatever it needs to do, like other functions. There's the manager process, which is responsible for configuration of the cluster. It contacts the workers when there's a configuration change or an administrative function to be performed. So this ensures that whenever you're trying to deploy a Zeek worker cluster, you can just say, you can just perform like a Zeek deploy on the manager, and the manager will automatically contact all the workers and get the configuration changes done and do other administrative functions like power off, reboot, everything of that sort. There's the proxy function, which is also very important because this ensures that the entire Zeek cluster is context aware. So it maintains like the state of all the Zeek workers in relation to each other. So for example, if you see a lot of traffic on one machine and a part of the traffic on the other machine, part of the attack on the other machine, the proxy can help you identify the entire attack as a whole. And last is the logger function, which receives and deduplicates all the logs, just an additional process.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I was more on the IT security and policy side of things. So PULSAR and the technology underlying it, which is Zeek, it logs all of the traffic going to and from the Science DMZ. This at the very least fills our auditing functions that we need. It also breaks out the traffic into individual logs based on criteria, which I'll talk more about later. It detects any suspected security incidents and flags them and sticks them in separate logs so they're easy to find. And it is also able to send email alerts based on specific incidents that we have told it to do. Eventually, we're working on putting together a team of individuals to either respond to these alerts manually or we might find a way to automate this, like blocking them at the edge router. All of this is determined by local policy, so you have to set this up and basically tell it what you want it to do with different kinds of traffic. So the power of Zeek, which is once again the underlying technology, is really customization. It uses its own scripting language, which is Zeek scripts, and everything is configured through this. What that means is that you can basically set it to do whatever you want. So you can load a script to detect a specific security incident. You can write your own. You can change the way that the logs are configured or laid out if you would like. So that's a really cool thing about it. When setting this up, specificity is a really important factor. So for example, you can say that all SSH traffic should be logged, but SSH brute forcing attempts should be logged into a separate log. And then you can say that you only want alerts to be sent about the SSH brute forcing attempts that are successful. That way that we're not spamming analysts with alerts that you really can't act upon. Another cool thing about Zeek is that you can integrate a lot of custom scripts. There's a lot of scripts that are already out there on the internet, and they're really easy to just plug in, and you can do a lot of cool things with it. Or once again, you can totally just completely write your own script. So some cool ones that I've integrated an SSL fingerprinting script. So what this does is it gives us some insight into what services are running on our encrypted traffic. So that's pretty cool. I also have a Bitcoin mining script because, you wouldn't want that to happen on a supercomputer. So that one is able to detect if someone's running Bitcoining on the supercomputers, and then we can shut that down. Once again, so it's really easy to integrate it with outside services, so that's also a plus. We've integrated threat intelligence into PULSAR. Threat intelligence is basically data points that you've gotten from the community that tell you about malicious actors. So for example, this might be IP addresses, host names, file hashes, that kind of thing. So we pull this into PULSAR, and then it compares it against the traffic that it sees. If there's a match, then it'll flag it as malicious and stick it in a separate log so that we know. And then once again, we're working on developing the next steps as to how to follow up on that. We're currently using Alien Vault OTX. It integrates really well with Bro, and there's a wide array of community intelligence. And it's free, but we are looking into some services that other universities use so that we can get data data about threats that they're seeing on their research networks, because that might be highly relevant to us. So like I said, one of the cool things about Zeek is the way that it breaks out the logs. So you have sort of general logs. For example, conn.log is all the traffic that comes across the network. It all goes to one place. There's also protocol-specific logs. So, for example, http.log, ftp.log, dns.log. If I want to see only HTTP traffic, I would go to that log and I can see it there. There's also logs that flag sort of specific events. So weird.log is sort of strange traffic or malformed traffic or traffic that's non-typical. This might be indicative of a security event, but we really don't know, so it's something to keep an eye on. This is also a good place to figure out if you have things that are not configured the correct way, because there's a good chance it'll show up here. Another log is notice.log. So this is basically where any events I've told it to flag get flagged. So my example of SSH brute forcing, that would go into notice.log. And then anything in this log you can create an alert upon. So for example, all of the SSH brute forcing attempts are logged into notice.log, but only the ones that are successful result in a notification being sent. Intel.log, that's where our threat intelligence hits go. So if you look through this, you'll see basically anything that's been hit upon. All of these are once again loaded and altered by site policy. PULSAR is highly customizable, which is its benefit. Below you see an example of a notification. So for example here, we had a situation where there was an internal host. Actually, the second that we turned on PULSAR, we saw this. There was an internal host that was scanning nodes within the research network. This thing was on the research network, and we were able to find it and shut it down. As you can see, this is kind of customized in the sense that I can specify that this is a local host that is scanning things. That way I'm not sending a massive amount of alerts based on anything that happens to poke the network. So that's kind of cool. So here's an example of the connection log. This is conn.log. You can see, like the originating IP address. You can see the responding IP address. We mark these with different levels of sensitivity. So this one is sensitive because it contains IP addresses. Once again, we're looking into anonymizing this data so that researchers are able to use it. And determining these sensitivity levels has been part of getting that set up. Below, you can see an example of what the log actually looks like in practice.
So my name is Brian, and I have been primarily responsible for the log distribution, indexing, and visualization into our data. And this is the logical overview of the entire log distribution portion of the PULSAR project. There's quite a lot going on here, and I'll go through it really quickly as I go through. On any given day, we generate tens of gigabytes of log data a day, usually around 20 to 30 gigs. And this data is stored in multiple places and utilized in multiple different ways. So the first location that we store our data is our long-term GPFS storage location. And we write logs directly from Zeek to this location in plain text for data backups. And in the future, it'll hold as a placeholder for sharing this data with researchers so they can utilize it in machine learning projects or other computational research projects they see fit. The second location that we store our logs is a Kafka data broker cluster. We write these logs here via FileBeat. So as logs are generated on the Zeek side, we transfer those to Kafka. Writing logs to Kafka in lieu of writing them directly to Elasticsearch gives us a few different benefits. One is that Kafka will act as a buffer. As Shivam had mentioned earlier, sometimes we see huge influxes of data and data connections on the network, and we don't want to overload the Elasticsearch cluster and hinder our high-speed ability to visualize our data in any way via Kibana. The second benefit and the main benefit of Kafka is that it gives us a very modular and centralized location where we can gather and distribute data across many different producer and consumer applications instead of just Elasticsearch and Kibana. So we can collect additional data from things like syslog servers or get additional
NetFlow data. And then we can distribute that data along with the IDS data that we've already been collecting to other consumer applications like Hadoop for batch processing or Spark for additional data processing. And in the future, when we get the anonymization portion finalized, we'll be able to stream anonymized data directly to custom applications written by researchers or utilized by researchers. At the latter portion of the overview, we have our Elasticsearch indexing cluster. Here, our data is actually stored and indexed to make it more easily searchable via Kibana. The latter portion also acts as the SIM for the IDSP security analysts. So with Kibana, we can create custom dashboards and also get additional alerting based off of those dashboards. So ITSP can utilize these dashboards to investigate correlation of events on the network, to see maybe whether or not past events have been attacks on the network have been successful, or if ongoing attacks need to be further investigated. If things need to be further investigated, these dashboards also give us a very dynamic ability to narrow down on specific time windows and data subsets to get us a really up-close look about what is happening on our network at any given time.
As we were talking about the data anonymization portion of this, so the logs that are generated by Zeek are a valuable resource for the network data, network characterization data. And we anonymize this so that researchers can perform analysis on it without violating the sensitivity of the data. So we use multiple tools to anonymize the data. One tool that we use is CryptoPan, which provides a one-to-one mapping for any IP addresses that may be in the logs. So what this means is that, for example, if there's an IP address, CryptoPan will preserve the network prefix of it. So for example, like 10.4, and the last two octets will be encrypted in a one-to-one fashion. So anything from, let's say, 10.4.1.1 is mapped to 10.4.1.2 in the encrypted logs. It will remain consistent everywhere in the encrypted logs, so it provides additional value of actually performing analysis based on hosts. We've also made use of random salt and hashing, and the Python scripts have also been developed to anonymize some of the other logs in Zeek. So just to give you an example right here, there are three fields that we would normally encrypt in a connection log, and those are the original, responding, and the tunnel IPs. So these are IPs that we encrypt with a one-to-one mapping. Two fields, which are the layer 2 origin address and the destination address, those are salt and hashed. These are usually the MAC addresses of the routers, so they don't provide that significant amount of insight for the researchers anyway, so we decide to just salt and hash it, just to, and we also do not want to give up actual data there, because that is also very sensitive, because again, router MAC addresses. And we drop the node name, which is the basically the Zeek worker that actually logged this. It's irrelevant to researchers, so we just decide to drop it. So this is a very cool diagram, because this shows us some of the operational observations we had when the system went live. The first thing that we discovered was obviously that there are many malicious external hosts that are constantly scanning Purdue's research infrastructure for open services, and it could be nmaps or just actually looking for actual services like open ports. This diagram shows the connections over a week. The part shaded in blue is any connection that is initiated but does not receive a response. So you can see a majority of the traffic that we see is a connection that is initiated but does not get a response, and this includes all the scanning that is happening on a network. On any given hour, we see over 1.5 million connections, and this diagram is very cool in the sense that it validates the functioning of our system, because as you can see, there's a clear dip right here somewhere around day 2. When we actually saw the dip, we actually went to our Slack channel and went to the time frame when the dip happened. And in the operations channel, we could clearly see the network engineer talking about bypassing one of our taps to perform a network upgrade. And as soon as the upgrade was complete, the tap was back in production, and we see all of the traffic again. So this just shows that this just was a good validation that we are actually seeing traffic and the taps are working properly, and so on and so forth.
Okay. So I feel like we've had a lot of impact by implementing Pulsar. So previously, like Garrett kind of talked about, we didn't have any network level security monitoring over the research network. We had host-based monitoring and firewalls, essentially. So this really is a significant increase in terms of the security that we have over the research network. This was something that was really desired, and it will also allow us to process different kinds of data and partner with people that we couldn't before. So, for example, now we can handle HIPAA data in a way that we weren't allowed to do that before. So it increases, I guess, sort of the value of our data center. So we've, like I said, internal hosts, this was flipping the lights on. We found that we have some that have been kind of a bigger threat than we've realized. So for example, like I was saying, on the first day we turned it on, and we immediately saw a host that was on the research network compromised, and it was scanning the inside of the research network and transmitting this data out. It was actually scanning a port that could have resulted in an attack, and like it was trying to get a remote shell basically based on this port, we think. Theoretically, it could have. So either way, we found this host and we were able to disable it, which is not something that necessarily would have happened if we hadn't had Pulsar. We had another case where there was basically a team of researchers and they deleted part of their Samba share, and they came to us and they were like, hey, what happened to my Samba share? And we were actually able to go through and see the commands which they issued deleting their share. So it also provides us some, like, I guess, insight into that kind of thing that happens. We have like a number of alerts coming in each week. I've really been working on getting these fine-tuned so that it's really only flagging the important things. So we have maybe like 30, 40 alerts each week so far. And we've had the Pulsar team analyzing these and forwarding them to IT security as needed. So in conclusion, we've really heightened the security over the research network. It's been a really positive thing. Work will continue on sort of fine-tuning the system. And I think as it's used, maybe we'll discover different security vulnerabilities or issues that we want to monitor for, and maybe we'll implement a script or we'll change how the logs are configured out because, once again, very highly customizable. And then we're working on getting the logs anonymized so that we can provide these to researchers and provide additional value this way. I've been really lucky to be a member of this student team that got to have really hands-on research with this as an undergrad. This wasn't a toy project. This was a really cool thing that I got to do. I want to thank you for listening. Let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you.
I have one. Some of the rules that you're using, I mean, you had to, was this, or the scripts, were these things that there's kind of a standard set out there you chose from? Were many of them things you had to write, or could they be automated, do you think?
It's a mix. So basically, when you install Zeek, it comes with a set of scripts that are basically automatically activated. Those are sort of the ones that log all the traffic. It detects certain security events, and it separates the traffic out into logs. There's also another set that comes with it that are kind of optional. You can do things like traceroute, like flag for that. You have to decide whether or not to turn these on. And then, I mean, there's some totally outside scripts that I've also found and integrated. And it's also a matter, it's not just a matter of like turning on or off the scripts or like writing some of them. A lot of it has been integrating it with outside services so that it's able to work that way too.
Yes, we have a question in the back.
What do you think your biggest challenge was, like starting from the beginning to now, that you overcame?
Eric, you're probably better for this one.
I mean, do you have... there are many challenges. We all face separate challenges. So, but
well, I mean, I think the number one challenge was just designing something that didn't increase latency. I mean, it was such a big network. There really wasn't a solution out there, or one that we had really heard of that was able to handle multiple 100 gigabit links. There was sort of a similar system that was instituted at Berkeley, but it was on 100 gigabit link. We really don't even know of one that's this large even remotely. So that's been a big challenge.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that I faced, and Eric and I worked on it for a very long time, was that at certain points we would only see half of the traffic in the system, like when it initially went into production, and we spent probably weeks like trying to figure out where the problem was, because half the time Zeke would start screaming at us saying, like 50% of your connections are half duplex, and we don't know where the other half of the traffic is going. So eventually we found out, like after a lot of troubleshooting, and during the troubleshooting we also added a lot of monitoring features at every layer. But after a lot of time we figured out that there was a network link that was active on the research core that was not supposed to be active. So half the traffic would go up a link that was monitored by us, and come back the link that was not monitored by us. And that happened because there was a rollback in a network upgrade that we were not aware of. So it is very important to also look outside the department. We thought it was a problem on our end, and we probably spent weeks figuring it out, but that was a big challenge.
Well, I would say another one is, once again, we didn't have any network level monitoring over the research network, so we really didn't know what the traffic was. So trying to decide what security policies to implement and like what to look for was kind of a process, because we just really didn't have any knowledge of like where to start. So I think that was another big challenge, and it's continuing to be an ongoing one.
Yeah. And one last challenge is definitely managing alerts. So just to give you some perspective, when Lauren was first working on alerts, she did not, so we talked about specificity is key. That is there for a reason, because Lauren was not specific enough, and I went to sleep and I woke up, and overnight it had sent about 60 to 70 alerts to my email on the mailing list that we have. So it was just insanity trying to manage just my inbox at that point. So we have been fine-tuning the system over a long period of time to actually get to a point where only the important stuff is shown.
What was fun that week, it happened over the weekend, and the server actually filled up. So I kept going in and trying to disable this, and I couldn't because it wouldn't push my change because the server was full, so it just kept going all weekend. It was great.
Yeah, and all the former students who worked on the project unsubscribed from the mailing list, which was very funny.
Yeah.
And they were pretty mad about it, but
it was funny.
It was very funny at that point, I guess.
Any other questions?
I'd like to thank you for the presentation and for the work you've done to keep our computing systems, research systems going here.
Awesome. Thank you.